Okay, we have about 2 more minutes, so read this and then try to, in the chat, I put in the directions, identify what type of passage this is, and then what is the thesis or what is the topic being debated. All right, so it is 11:10, so we're going to move on to the next one. But as so many of you correctly identified, this is a cost benefit analysis passage. Some signs that it's cost benefit is that we have and the topic being debated is whether or not cohesion is good or bad for group decision making. Some of you focused on some more like nuanced topics within it, and I would always challenge you to like think broad. So as we can see from this first paragraph, and what we're commonly going to see in cost benefit is we're going to have a more neutral topic, and it's going to either like choose to really explore the positives or really explore the negatives in that first paragraph. This is going to be, so in this one, we're really talking about those benefits first, and then we have a but that shifts it to show there's going to be balance. No one here thought that it was persuasive, which I'm very proud of, because this definitely is a tricky one. I chose a tricky one, but persuasive would be less heavy on the benefits from the beginning. Remember, the author is going to try to convince us throughout the passage. And so if the author hits us with all their best arguments right up front, that's not going to be conducive to their argument. Same with the negatives. Whereas and then it's not informative because we're clearly talking about the benefits. So there is like a side that's being discussed first. Great job. Okay, next one. So we're gonna have two passages back to back here. So I'm gonna spend a little bit less time, like we're gonna do the 5 minutes and then we're not gonna discuss it. I'm gonna instantly go to the second one for 5 minutes and then we'll discuss them both together. So again, same drill. We'll come back at 11:16, but I want you to read and I want you to identify which of the three and then what is the topic being debated or what is the thesis being taught to us or convinced. All right, about 2 more minutes, and feel free, you can either DM the whole chat or you can just DM me privately. All right, so we're gonna quickly go on to passage B, but yes, because it's in the same realm and I wanna make sure we get through a lot of these. But passage A, as so many of you identified, this is an informative passage telling us about the importance of drilling fluids. If you wanna add that it's in drilling fluids are important to oil well drilling, that works too, but really what the author's trying to tell us is drilling fluids are important to drilling, here's why. So great job. A lot of you nailed that. Okay, passage B, do the same thing, and we'll be back at 11:21. Oh, you guys are all messaging me privately and like, I wish you could, like, these are making me so happy. You guys are doing such a great job of identifying. I'm so proud. Like, just, oh my gosh, the nuance, I'm getting, oh, not to be cheesy, but I'm getting chills. Like, you guys are just nailing it. And just a couple of you, like, I know have taken the class a couple, a couple of you have like taken the class pretty consistently, and just seeing the confidence of how you guys are responding and how nuanced you are getting in your answers is just, oh, it's making me so happy. We're probably going to move on at 11:20 because it seems like there's only one or two of you that haven't answered yet. So we'll move on at 11:20, but just keep up the good work, guys. This is amazing. Never mind, it's 11:20. 11:21 is when we'll continue. All right, it's 11:21. So as all of you in the chat correctly identified, this is again going to be an informative passage about how the discharges from drilling are an environmental concern in offshore oil production. Great. Okay, we've got two more. So now we're going into more science because I know that that's where a lot of you were concerned. So read this one, and again, same drill at 11:26. All right, so this one is stumping us a little bit. So I'm really going to challenge you to look at that second sentence, the first sentence in the second paragraph, and see if that shifts what we're thinking. And remember, informative, they're telling us facts. There's no disagreement with the facts, and we're just going to learn about the facts. Persuasive, we have to have a truth that the author's thesis is dissenting from. And cost benefit, we have an overall topic that the author is removed from, and they're fairly going to debate one versus the other. All right, about 1 more minute. Okay, so this one was a bit more challenging, and this is the fourth passage of a series, so it is going to be a little bit more indirect. So this is actually a persuasive passage, and it is persuasive because remember, we've got this generic truth. So the generic truth that people agree on, which we see from researchers have generally thought this fail. And then again with the many, so the common universal truth is that the volcano climate connection is the reason behind, is like the whole reason behind the year without summer, all of that. But we get this dissent, which is the volcano climate connection seems plausible, but so this is addressing like, even though this is understood, but it's not as strongly believed. And I know that some of us got a little confused about whether or not this was cost benefit or not. If it was cost benefit, we would have a neutral author. Here we don't have a neutral author because they say seems plausible, but. So if it was persuasive or not persuasive, if it was cost benefit, we'd have something more along the lines of this theory is being challenged by. Like there would be a more neutral approach to contrasting them as opposed to this where we have the author seems plausible, but like the author is saying that like their viewpoint is aligned with Mass and Portman. And so it is persuading us that the volcano climate connection is not as strong as previously believed. Yeah, okay, great job. All right, this is our last one, and this is actually the passage that we are going to be working on today. So it is a science passage. It is thick. So enjoy, don't get scared. That's what the rest of our class is for, is to work on this passage. So read it and try to identify. So I've already said earlier in class that we're going to be doing, today's focus is going to be on an informative science passage. So we know it's informative. So now what I want you to do is I want you to focus on informative. If it's informative, which it is, what is the topic we're going to learn about? And try to get that down. I know there's a lot of big, scary words in here. Try to get this down to like a quick, no more than 10 words about what our topic is. And during this time, I would like everyone to grab a piece of paper because we're going to follow our roadmap scavenger hunt, and we're going to put our topic at the very top. So I'm going to give another, we're going to be back at 11:35. So when we start, I want you to have a pen or a pencil, a piece of paper, and have tried to identify what the informative like thesis is of this paragraph. All right, about 3 more minutes and put those guesses about what the thesis is in the chat. All right, so far no one has put guesses in the chat about what they believe the thesis is. So I am going to give, even if I just want everyone to try, like, don't get scared, like try to bump this down into what is the author trying to teach us? I know this is a big scary paragraph, but I promise, like, you can DM me privately. There's no shame in it, and we will go over it as a group, but I want everyone to at least try, because this is a skill. You've been practicing it. We've done 4 so far. Like, you have this, I know. So I'm going to extend it to 11:38 because I do want to make sure that we're at least trying to guess it first before we reveal and then continue on to passage. All right, so we are going to identify and move into the full passage. So it is informative, and the topic that they're trying to teach us, or the author is trying to teach us, is how other hormones, specifically peptide and steroid hormones, through regulating homeostasis of body fluids, can affect behavior. So as we can see, this really comes from it has now become clear, however, that other hormones, so specifically we're pulling it from this sentence, and then especially in our thesis statement, we want to, when possible, get as specific as possible so we can pinpoint what we're talking about. So through this, we get that recent studies have shown that other hormones can affect behavior. That's great, but we want to get a little more specific. So the hormones that they specifically mention are peptide and steroid hormones. And then when they're saying can affect behavior, the behavior that they're specifically talking about is homeostasis of body fluids. If we wanted to get more specific, I guess you could say other hormones, specifically peptide and steroid, through homeostasis of water and salt consumption affect behavior. Like if you wanted to get even more, but essentially that's what we're trying to talk about. We're going to talk about how peptide and steroid influence the water salt homeostasis. So in informative, and this goes for everything, but specifically in science passages, we're going to see it the most because that's when we're going to be exposed to new vocabulary, is that we want to keep track of the words that the author has defined through us in context. So the LSAT is tricky, but it's not unfair. And so it would be unfair for them to throw out a vocabulary word such as homeostasis without providing some context. So we are not responsible to know like words that are kind of terms of art or words that are outside of like what a reasonable person would know unless they provide context. However, if they do provide context clues, then those words are fair game. So here, the words that we get are homeostasis, and they define homeostasis to mean physiological balance. So we know that we're responsible for homeostasis. They've provided us enough context, so it's up to us to understand and make sure we're tracking that. Let's see if there's any in here so far. Osmolality, the concentration of solids. Like they specifically defined that for us. So we're now responsible, like they've given us enough information to know what osmolality is and to know what homeostasis is. So I think whenever you see that, like really make sure that we're honing in and we know that like, okay, this is a word that they've defined, so it's important. It's important that I really understand and that I know to apply. But like, for example, up here, gonadal hormones, we do not need to know anything about gonadal hormones outside of the fact that they influence reproductive behavior. So when we're reading science, I do think sometimes people get overwhelmed with all the vocabulary. Like they will define the words that they want you to understand. If they don't define it and it's a word that like is not, that you wouldn't have encountered in like basic science words, like obviously words like hypothesis, words like data, words like solutes, like things like that, they expect you to know. But outside of that, like any fancier words, if they really want you to know it, they'll define it in context to be fair. Okay, so at the top of our papers, I want us to write other hormones, specifically peptide and steroids, through homeostasis of body fluids can affect behavior. So write our topic at the very top. And throughout this, we are going to be following along with our reading comprehension checklist. So most of you already have this, but if you don't, I would say take a quick screenshot or take a photo of it with your phone, because this is the order we're going to be following as we go about this. So we've already identified that it's an important passage. We've already pinpointed the thesis. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to read through the passage, and we're going to, at the end of each paragraph, we're going to make sure that we have a quick 7-word, just basic explanation of what happened. That way we're setting up a roadmap for ourselves when we go to the questions about where to go to come back. Because again, our goal with the questions is to make a funnel. So the highest part is our passage. The questions should limit us. Through the question, we should be able to pinpoint where in the passage the information should come from. And then that's where we get our answer in that realm. Great, okay. Let me pull up the passage. Yes. Great work, everyone. Okay. So let me pull up this passage. So this one is going to be, I don't know what they were thinking, but honestly, this is the longest. I think it's literally 2 paragraphs. So it's that, which is great for us because then that means that we're only having to like read 2, but this whole passage is genuinely, oh wait, never mind, it's 3. Yeah, okay. Share. Okay. So we read this. So really what happened outside of this first paragraph, because I know we already read it. I'm going to read it really quickly just to kind of align us. So what I'm wanting you to focus on in the chat as I'm reading this is give me like a quick rundown of what happened here other than defining our key terms. So we already figured out the thesis, but this is a longer paragraph and we do have a substantial amount of information that flows after our thesis. So there is going to be like one other detail that we want to kind of write down to track paragraph wise. Right. Discussions about hormones influence behavior have generally been limited to the effects of gonadal hormones on reproductive behavior and have emphasized the parsimonious arrangement whereby the same hormones involved in the biology of reproduction also influence sexual behavior. It has now become clear, however, that other hormones, in addition to their recognized influence on biological functions, can affect behavior. Specifically, the peptide and steroid hormones involved in maintaining the physiological balance or homeostasis of body fluids also appear to play an important role in the control of water and salt consumption. The phenomenon of homeostasis in animals depends on various mechanisms that promote stability within the organism. Despite an inconstant external environment, the homeostasis of body fluids, whereby the osmolality, the concentration of solids of blood plasma is closely regulated, is achieved primarily through alterations in the intake and excretion of water and sodium, the 2 principal components of the fluid matrix that surrounds body cells. Appropriate compensatory responses are initiated when deviations from normal are quite small, thereby maintaining plasma osmolality within relatively narrow ranges. Okay, so I'm gonna give about 3 minutes, just quickly like put in the chat, what was like in 5 words, like what did I need to know from that other than we have our thesis, we defined like our big target words are going to be osmolality and then homeostasis, but is there anything specifically like we need to know outside of defining those terms that's gonna be useful to us? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, everyone. For whatever reason, like my chat wasn't giving me any notifications, but now I'm seeing that you guys were participating. So I appreciate it because I was like, oh my gosh, they've been so great this whole time. I don't know why no one is talking anymore. So that was on me. Actually, let's just blame Zoom. We'll just blame Zoom. It's fine. I take no fault. All Zoom's fault. All right, I am gonna push us a little bit just because I want to make sure we get to the topic, the questions. But I would say the other thing we need to know outside of defining osmolality and homeostasis from this paragraph is just like the application of when these deviation, like these compensatory responses, so the body's responses to regulate the water salt balance are initiated from like normal deviations. So just kind of applying the terms about like what it's going to look like. So when there's deviations in water and salt, then this is when these compensatory responses are going to hop on in. All right. Next page. Oh, it really is 2 paragraphs. All right. So everyone, as I read this, I want you to think about What are the key points that we're pulling from here that are going to help us when we go to the questions and determining our roadmap? In the osmoregulation of body fluids, the movement of water across cell membranes permits minor fluctuations in the concentration of solutes in extracellular fluid to be buffered by corresponding changes in the relatively larger volume of cellular water. Nevertheless, the concentration of solutes in extracellular fluid may at times become elevated or reduced by more than the allowed tolerances of 1 or 2%. It is then the complementary physiological and behavioral responses come into play to restore plasma osmolality to normal. Thus, for example, a decrease in plasma osmolality, such as that which occurs after the consumption of water in excess of need, leads to the excretion of surplus body water in the urine by inhibiting secretion from the pituitary gland of vasopressin, a peptide hormone that promotes water conservation in the kidneys. Boom. So without even moving on, like we already know that vasopressin is another word that we have to add to our list of words we're responsible for because of the way that it defined it in text. So it's a peptide hormone promoting water conservation in kidneys. As might be expected, thirst also is inhibited then to prevent further dilution of body fluids. Conversely, an increase in plasma osmolality, such as which occurs after one eats salty foods or after body water evaporates without being replaced, stimulates the release of vasopressin, increasing the conservation of water and the excretion of solutes in the urine. This process is accompanied by increased thirst, with the result of making plasma osmolality more dilute through the consumption of water. The threshold for thirst appears to be slightly higher than for vasopressin secretion, so that thirst is stimulated only after vasopressin has been released in amounts sufficient to produce maximal water retention by the kidneys. That is, only after osmotic dehydration exceeds the capacity of the animal to deal with it physiologically. Okay, that was a thick paragraph. And I know we got a lot of stuff there. We learned a new buzzword, which was vasopressin. So in the first paragraph, we're talking about just sort of the normal regulations of the body. So, and then I think even in the second paragraph, it's the tolerance of 1 or 2%. So the body is able to kind of fix things if they're within a tiny scope. So really then what this paragraph is talking about is what happens when we're beyond that 1 or 2%. And it kind of gives us a little formula, or it gives us like a little flow chart. So we talk about vasopressin, and then we give the example of like what happens when the body needs more water, versus what happens when the body like has too much water, versus what happens when the body doesn't have enough water. So everyone in the chat, like if you could come up with like a quick sentence that's going to be your roadmap to figuring out how to come back to this. We'll start looking at the questions at 11:55 because I know this was a lot of information. Just a sentence like, if we had to have a quick sentence summary about what we read here, or applying like for me, what I did for this one is I made a little like flow chart. So for mine, it's like water increases equals inhibits vasopressin, inhibits thirst, and then like salt up, vasopressin released, increase thirst, like something about that. Like I want you on your paper to have written something that's going to be your roadmap to know where to look if you're asked a question about like salty or water. Because this is all for you. The reason we do these sentence summaries is that so when we get to the questions, like you can quickly pinpoint where this information came from. Put this back on question view. Great. And I'll scroll down. All right, about one more minute, then we're going to hop on into these questions. All right, we're going to get started with the questions, so I want to make sure we're able to get through them. Okay, so which of the following best states the main idea of the passage? Because this is informative, we know that our main idea is going to come from our thesis. So the thesis that we wrote down was other hormones, specifically peptide and steroid hormones, through homeostasis of body fluids can affect behavior. So we're looking for something that identifies that. So let me expand this to see how many we can get. Okay, so again, with our funnel, like we have our question, we have our prediction, and we're gonna let that, will the thesis normally be in the first paragraph? So for informative and persuasive, our thesis is either gonna be in our first paragraph or it's gonna be in that like second paragraph in the first sentence. If it's cost benefit though, our thesis is going to be in the author's decision when the author picks a side. So that's why like identifying what type of passage it is the key. Because normally if you get this first question wrong, it's because it was cost benefit and you like chose something that wasn't the author's recommendation, or you thought it was cost benefit and chose the author's recommendation when it was really like something more generic. So let's take our prediction of other hormones that like through regulation of body fluids, salt, blood, thirst, can affect behavior and see which one calls to us. I'll scroll down in like 30 seconds so we can see E. And again, my strategy with questions is you're going to start with A, and then you're going to compare each one against it and only keep one answer at a time. So for example, I'm going to read A. If I like A, it is now B, C, and D's job to beat A, and I'm only keeping one. So if I find B is better than A, then I instantly eliminate A and only go with B. We don't have time to keep like 3 different answers we kind of like. We either like it or you don't. So, all right, I'm gonna scroll down. And then put your answers in the chat and we'll move on at 11:59. All right, it is 11:59. So what we were really looking for, the key words here were hormones affect behavior. So as we can see up here, both the solute concentration and volume of the blood plasma, the focus here is the hormones and how the hormones impact it. So we're missing that from here. B, behavioral responses to changes can compensate for physiological malfunction. Again, we're specifically looking for hormones because remember, that's like the big topic that we just learned about, that hormones can help regulate these. The effect of hormones, we like it on animal behavior, and the physiologically is only recently been discovered. We see that it has become clear, however, like it is new, but that's just not, the fact that it's new isn't necessarily enough, but we'll keep it. Behavioral and physiological responses to major changes in osmolality of animals' blood plasma are hormonally influenced and complement one another. There we go. So that's talking about the hormones and how the hormones can affect behavior, specifically the changes in osmolality. Perfect. The mechanisms regulating reproduction are similar. We don't care about that. We do not care. Okay, next. Author of the passage cites the relationship between gonadal hormones and reproductive behavior in order to, okay. So this is an example of where, so if you don't remember where gonadal hormones are, we could do a quick little Control F, that brings us to the top. So now that we're here, gonadal hormones, on reproductive behavior. So we're really going to focus on this sentence. And this is where whenever you get asking about a specific term or sentence, I want you to think about how that sentence plays into the overall goal of the first paragraph. So the overall goal of the first paragraph is, again, to give us background knowledge about hormones and then this new development that hormones can operate outside of their original function and into maintaining other like behavioral, can affect behavior. So that's really what we're going for here. So read that, think about the overall goal of that first paragraph, and then let's look at the answers. And again, in like 30 seconds, I'll scroll down to show E. And if anyone needs me to scroll back to see A or B, just let me know. All right, about 1 more minute, then we're going to move on. All right, so sorry to rush us along, but we're gonna stop at the top and kind of like knock things out. Okay. So the overall function of this first paragraph was to introduce this like new idea that other hormones, in addition to their recognized influence on biological functions, influence behavior. So really what we're talking about here with the gonadal hormones is we talk about how those hormones regulate behavior, but now we're showing how limited to the effects. So it kind of talks about like the history of this research and then contrast that with the new research that came out about the salt and the water retention. So we're looking for something that shows like previous research and then paving the way for the current research. So review briefly the history of research into the relationship between gonadal and peptide that has led So this looks really good, but we get to and peptide hormones, and we don't talk about peptide hormones up here. Like peptide is the new thing we're discussing, so that just doesn't happen. Decry the fact that previous research has concentrated on the relatively minor issue of the relationships between hormones and behavior. I like that it says previous research concentrated on the relatively minor issue, but the fact that it says relatively minor issue of hormones and behavior, like how do we know that's a minor issue? But we can keep it, like we're going to keep it and we're going to contrast it. Establish the emphasis on earlier research into the connections between hormones and behavior before elaborating on the results described in the passage. So just between B and C, C is stronger because it talks about the earlier research and the connections between the gonadal hormones and reproductive behavior. And then it's now going to elaborate on how that research has expanded to include peptide and steroid hormones with blood and water and thirst and all of that. So C instantly trumps B. Okay. Introduce a commonly held misconception about relationships between hormones and behavior before refuting it. These results don't refute this, it just expands upon it because we have the results were limited to just gonadal hormones on behavior. Summarize the main findings of recent research described in the passage. No, this is not, the gonadal hormones were not the recent research that we're going to talk about. So it is C. Okay, next question. It can be inferred from the passage that which one of the following is true of vasopressin. Okay, so where do we talk about vasopressin? We talk about it in this second paragraph. So this is when that little like quick summary we made is going to help us because we're going to have to figure out what is true of vasopressin. So we know that vasopressin is the peptide hormone that helps like with water conservation in the kidneys. So if vasopressin stops, we get thirstier. If it's released, then, or if it stops, then we're not thirsty. If it's released, then we are thirsty. So we have that prediction, and now let's go into applying that prediction to these questions. So vasopressin increase, so if it's released, we get thirsty. If it's inhibited, we're not thirsty, it stops thirst. So think about that, predict an answer here, and then come back to here, and then in a couple seconds, I'll show E. All right, so not trying to rush anyone, but I do want to make sure we move on. So please feel free to either interject with your mic or interject in the chat if I am moving too fast when you have a question. So let's go through these. The amount secreted depends on the level of steroid hormones in the blood. So the relationship, we know vasopressin is only to do with promoting the water conservation in the kidneys. So when this happens, we do see increases in like plasma osmolality and all of that, but it doesn't depend on the steroid hormones in the blood. It depends on the salt or it depends on like body water. So this just isn't applicable because vasopressin only deals with water, and anything that comes after isn't vasopressin. Okay. Amount secreted is important for maintaining homeostasis in cases of both increased and decreased osmolality. Yeah, so this doesn't go against what we know. So we know that if more secreted, then it's going to inhibit thirst, and that will impact the salt level and the osmolality. But we also know that if more is released, then that's going to make us thirsty. We're going to drink water, and that's going to dilute it further. So this, and also look how mild this is. Like, it's important for maintaining homeostasis in both. We talk about both. This is looking pretty good. It works in conjunction with steroid hormones in increasing plasma volume. Its goal is not to increase plasma volume, it's just to deal with water, and if like other things are influenced by it, cool. But again, like the only thing we really know about vasopressin is the fact that it promotes water conservation, and then we talk about the impact from it doing that. It works in conjunction with steroid hormones, so same thing over here. Like, it's there to talk about like water and thirst. So the sodium appetite happens prior to it. And is secreted after an animal becomes thirsty? No, the secretion of it is what makes the animal thirsty. So here, this is just kind of goofing up our order. Perfect. Okay. Primary function of the passage as a whole. So again, like we go back to our main point and the author about what's persuasive, informative, or cost benefit. So it's teaching us how other hormones can affect behavior. So look at these. And then in 2 minutes, just let me know which one you think it is doing. So remember, with reading comp, we're going to treat it like a top-down question in terms of we have to ask ourselves, did this happen? So as we're going through these, like, did they present new information? Did they question standard assumptions? Did they reinterpret earlier findings? Did they advocate a novel theory? And did they outline a new approach? So really ask yourselves, like, which one of these actually happened? And at 2:13, we'll come back to discuss it. But put your answers in the chat in the meantime.
Sorry, what does it mean by a novel theory? Like, I feel like that comes up a lot, but I never understand. Like,
yeah, so novel just means like unique, like completely new.
Oh, okay, perfect.
And then advocate, so between D and E, like E would be more of like, are they informing us about a new approach? Or D, are they are they trying to say that this new theory is the best? All right, I think everyone's gotten a chance to read them. Okay, so let's talk about this. A, present new information. So the new information being presented here would be the peptide and steroid hormones influencing behavior. Cool, so that doesn't go against what we have, so we'll keep that for now. B, question standard assumptions. So this would be more persuasive, and this isn't a persuasive passage because this is implying that the author, in bringing forward the information about the peptide and steroid hormones and how they affect behavior, is going against current assumptions. And it's not, like, it does give us some prior information, but this information doesn't go against the new information presented. It's just saying, like, before we only had research about gonadal hormones and reproductive behavior. But now we have we have new information that talks about more behaviors impacted. So that's why B is not it. Reinterpret earlier findings. So again, this is coming to the same idea. Is it trying to say that this information was wrong and we're going to reinterpret it? No, this information, yes, it goes along with the old information, but it expands. So it's not reinterpreting. And that's what really knocks out D and E. So D, advocating a novel theory. This isn't a novel theory, like this is a theory that's already existed, but now we're just expanding upon it. For it to be novel, it would have to be completely new. It's not. Outline a new approach, same thing. Like this is not a new approach, it's just expanding upon an approach that had limited information. So that's how we get to A. All right, according to the passage, these are the best because this is where we can pull directly from the passage. We love this. According to the passage, all of the following typically occur in homeostasis of blood plasma osmolality except, all right, let's see. So when we're talking about blood plasma osmolality, we're talking about down here. And if we didn't know, we could have Control F and got us here. So we know that we are like cross-checking to see. Okay, so we're looking at here. Homeostasis is blood plasma osmolality. So what we're really looking for here is like this whole paragraph. So we're not going to highlight the whole thing. Yeah. So now we can kind of go back and forth and knock things out. So do we have proof that hunger is diminished? No, we talk about water, thirst, but not hunger. So this is probably our answer, but let's thirst. We definitely talk about that. Vasopressin, we spent so much time on vasopressin. This is mentioned. Water is excreted. Yes, we talk about water. Sodium is consumed. Yes, we get thirsty. If we eat too much sodium, then we get thirsty. So A is the easy answer here. So these are like our freebies where as long as you are able to, through your roadmap, get yourself to where the information is coming from, these are pretty straightforward and easy point grabs. Okay, according to the passage, another one. And oftentimes with science passages, they are going to give you more of these freebies because they know the vocabulary makes finding it so scary that it's like equal difficulty. Okay, according to the passage, the withholding of vasopressin. Okay, so we know we're talking about vasopressin. So we're looking for something that's talking about withholding vasopressin. All right, inhibiting secretion. So we know we're really focusing here. So again, our funnel. Cool. So we know we're looking for here because this is when the vasopressin is inhibited. So now we just have to use this and find our answer. And what I'm always going to advocate is like with our funnel, the best use of our time is going to be like we start big, we go small, then smaller, like we find that piece in the paragraph. And as long as it's a reasonable amount of information, like this is reasonable. In the other question, when it was like a full paragraph, no. But as long as it's a reasonable amount of information, I would skim it just to kind of remind yourself the threshold of what you're looking for, because that'll narrow our scope. So quickly read that and then go into the answer choices. And remember, this is done according to the passage. So this like has to be in the passage. It has to be there. There's no implying. If it's not in the passage, we don't know her. All right, so for this one, we're stuck between B and C. So if you were looking at something else, put it away. If you chose B, then I want you to make sure that you have proof in the passage. If you chose C, I want you to specifically like look at if that is said in the passage. So between B and C, which one is explicitly said in the passage? Okay, you guys are seeing it. Yeah, so C does this very tricky thing where, and especially it happens in science passages, is like it uses buzzwords that we like, but it distorts the order. So we do have like specifically, we've got vasopressin is a peptide hormone that promotes water conservation in the kidneys. So if vasopressin promotes water conservation and we inhibit it, so we stop it, that means we're not going to have an increased conservation of water in the kidneys because less vasopressin would be, yes, it's a trap, absolutely. Whereas B, I mean, it's literally in this last sentence right here. So if kind of eliminating things is your issue, what I really recommend is like go through your answers. And if you're stuck between two, then really go back to the passage and try to find like the exact verbiage in the text that supports it. All right, so great job, everyone. As always, I'm gonna put my number 7. Yes, you can use Command F on the actual test. That's why I'm such a big fan of it. And like, I really, really urge you, if you want to do games on paper, if you want to do like LR, like paper versions of the test, absolutely, that's fine. But with RC, like, I really recommend that you, that you practice your reading comp on a computer. That way you can practice with Command F and with the highlighting. So I dropped my number and my email in the chat. I do these classes. It's going to happen throughout October. I'm not sure if it's going to continue after that. We're still kind of going back and forth on it. But I do one-on-one tutoring. And so if you are interested in more focused efforts, feel free to reach out, or if you have any questions about today's class, feel free to text me or email me. But thank you so much for coming. Are there any final questions before I let everyone go? No. All right. So next week in class, we're going to be focusing on persuasive passages. So just as a little like heads up, last week we really focused on cost benefit. Next week we're going to focus on persuasive. And then I believe it's going to be an arts and humanities one, just because we've done science now, we've done law passages with cost benefit. So that's what's coming up next week. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your Sunday. Bye.